So thank you so much to everybody who's here, and thank you so much to everybody who's watching online. We're really grateful to finish this semester of the Building Your Online Teaching Toolbox with a great presentation from Dr. Jess Gregory in Educational Leadership. She is going to talk to us about Big Brother and how we can use it to help us and our students do well in our online courses. So Jess, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I dropped our warm-up questions in the chat, and I'm going to make my chat a little larger because the laptop is small. And so the warm-up question is, what's your favorite pie? And you're not limited to sweet. It could be a savory pie. And do you prefer Teams or Blackboard? And so you don't have to turn on your camera. And if you don't want to, good morning, Melanie. If you don't want to reply verbally, you can drop it in the chat. But Bo, can I ask you to go first? What's your favorite pie? And do you prefer Teams or Blackboard?
Yeah, so I would say it's peach cobbler, and I think I like Blackboard more than Teams.
And is there someone else who'd be willing to share next? Thank you, Kimberly.
Strawberry rhubarb and Blackboard, although I'd like to learn more about Teams. I keep teaching myself I'm going to learn more about Teams.
Wonderful.
I'll go next.
Thank you, Melanie.
I would say lemon pie. The sour the better. The more sour the better. And I prefer Teams all the way. I am not a fan of Blackboard at all. And the only thing that I'm missing on Teams is the ability to put grades for students. So I can put grades in Teams, but I am the only one who sees them. They don't have any type of access for those of you that are not that familiar with Teams.
I agree, Mel. I am totally team Teams, but I do put the grades into Blackboard so students have access to them. And would anyone else like to share out loud?
Oh,
Thank you.
I think while there are many pies that I absolutely love, I think I have to go back to the classic apple pie. I would respond to Teams or Blackboard for what? Because there are certainly things that Blackboard does better, but there are things that Teams does better.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? So then I will say, I think my favorite pie is probably chicken pot pie. And I am team Teams all the way. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, but I do want to just let you know the chat is open and I can see in the chat. You're also welcome when I'm sharing my screen. If you have a question, you want to unmute, you go right ahead and unmute. That's fine with me. If you could let me know, I can see your beautiful faces. So if you would just let me know whether you can see the screen with a nod, a shake, a thumb, perfect. And so today is really all about using Big Brother to help us engage more with our classes. And so before, oh, that's the washer just finished. So the clothes are now washed and dried. Awesome. So before I get really into the objectives, I really wanted to start with the why. When we started teaching online due to necessity or a drive for greater access to our courses, teaching online really gives us a different set of challenges. And that really, it's particularly true when it comes to student engagement. And so we have other challenges, right? When we're teaching in person, we can manage some of these better, but there are a lot of distractions for our learners when we're teaching online. while it's great the students can handle childcare or elder care responsibilities because they're able to have class from home, there's usually a greater number of distractions when they're attending virtually. There's also these barriers to interaction, whether it's the keyboard, the phone, their audio is working differently. Anything to do with screens puts a barrier. It changes the interactions between our learners and us. And so while careful planning, we can maximize the interaction. By the nature of online learning, things are just different. And so while those two are significant, they're not really the focus of the webinar today. Today, I really want to lift up this perceived lack of accountability that some students feel when they're taking an online class. And so here are our objectives. We have a threefold set of objectives. The first two are technical, where we're going to be able to use the Insight feature see what's going on. But the third is arguably the most important. It's how can we use these tools to increase learner engagement in our classes? And so that's where we're going to start. Is there anybody who has any questions on what we're going to do? All right, so then I just wanted to sort of lay the what out there. And as researchers, it just seemed relevant to ground what we're doing in the research. And so I want to acknowledge that this research is generally done by faculty. And so there could be faculty bias embedded in the research, whether it's presented as an issue or not, there very well could be faculty bias. But what the research says is that faculty describe that learners can hide behind the screens. They turn off the cameras and they just disappear. It's like you're teaching to an empty room. One research found that professors felt the lack of connection and that their classes felt less emotional. And professors reported feeling disengaged with their students and that it's harder to care about people you don't meet. And so that's a real issue because when we're creating a class, we need to care not just about the meeting the learning objectives, but whether our learners as people are learning. And so that's a big issue. Additionally, being behind a screen might impinge on the student's sense of accountability. And so they might be silent. They could be disruptive or even disrespectful. And it's situations like that that happen more online because when you're in class, you can use a variety of different strategies to adjust those with those management strategies. And so that's sort of the why. And so now we can apply Nell Nodding's ethic of care to online learning. And so we really emphasize that this is sort of an online space, an online pedagogy of care, beginning with relationships. A great way to start with these relationships is to be really intentional, really upfront about what learners can expect from you and what you expect from them. And so this could be a separate discussion, or it could be a part of your norm setting. If you set norms for your class towards the beginning of the, when you're establishing norms for the class, if you set the norms, you can embed the expectations for online behaviors with that norm setting process. And so one thing that's worked for me is each class, we actually start with the norms right there and say, are these still working for us? Do we need to modify them? It doesn't take that long. Once you're a few weeks into the semester, you really do have a set of norms that everyone can abide. And so that 30 to 45 seconds at the beginning of class just reinforces that we are all bound by these norms, that we set them together and that we're part of a classroom community. Also, right at the outset, it's important to acknowledge that not everyone knows what data are tracked. Not everybody knows, and so they might think that they're in a more private space than they are. And so sharing the data that are tracked reduces the likelihood that future conversations are going to be perceived as gotcha, like you were tricking them somehow. And so this way we can use the data to be supportive rather than punitive. So I want to stop for a second and come back to the group. And how are you feeling about this idea of the norm setting, sharing the expectations, and letting them know what data are tracked? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I've done.
Bob's got a head shake. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Bo, you were going to say something?
Sure. So I do the norms every single class, and I found that to be really, really important in a variety of ways, because students, if we don't tell them what our expectations are and what we're looking for, they'll start worrying about it. And I've seen students being worried about when I'm going to communicate with them and how I'm going to communicate with them. So establishing those norms has been really, really important. I haven't done the data thing, and I think that's really an interesting point, that it could be a point of worry for students as well.
And that's what I was going to point out, that especially with underprivileged students, they often see tracking as surveillance, and they may have had a lot of negative experiences with surveillance. And so making that upfront, and if you can give them reasons why it's important that this stuff is tracked, then that helps.
We've got Kim and then Melanie. Sorry, can I use Kim instead of Kimberly?
Kim is preferred.
Awesome.
So I stepped away for a minute. So I can you just one sentence, what you're talking about, norms?
Norms and the sharing of the fact that those data are tracked by the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so letting them know that their data are tracked anyways. So it's not, and I got you.
Okay. So I haven't done that. I haven't shared that data, but not in a, like I'm not going to let them know kind of thing. But I hadn't thought about it. I do look at it, the data though, when I want to kind of see where the group's going. And like, if I post something and my expectation is like, you've read the information, like I do go in. So I go in and look at it. In terms of other things, I do think it's important to explain, like one thing that this actually came up in a graduate class, and it's come up in other, but mostly I'm in graduate right now, but is using Safe Assign.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think from my experience at the university and on academic standing, I think there's a very broad use on the university level of Safe Assign. Like I think some faculty do use it to catch people plagiarizing. And I don't use it in that way, but when I present to students that, like, I don't just add it to an assignment, I tell them it's going to be there, and I'm very upfront with telling them why it's there. I don't use it as a punitive tool, unless obviously there's something in there that is purely just plagiarism. I have the students use that. I tell them I'll use it as a place for me to, in some ways, check, kind of double check what I'm seeing, because I can't verify everything. But I also use it as a learning tool for them, a way for them to learn more about how they're writing and how they're citing and that sort of thing.
Lovely. And so that's just a different way of being transparent about the data that are being used.
Yes.
Melanie?
Yeah, so I don't have that much experience with teaching online. Previously to Southern, when we went into COVID, when I had to move into online mode, I already had a full report with my students that I have known for the past 4 years. So moving online was very an easy transition. And then when I came in at Southern, I did hybrid for the first month, for the first semester. And that was a real struggle trying to get that engagement. I was not aware of the data tracking, so I didn't really share the norms and that information. I am now, and I'm going to prepare, I'm starting to prepare to teach a full online class next fall. So I'm starting right to go into checking what it is that I need, how do I need to keep the students communicated and be transparent about everything, because I do it in the in-person classrooms. I constantly, at the beginning of the class, are there questions? Do we know what we're doing? Are the expectations clear? Do you all know what I want you to do for next class? So even if it's my seniors that I already had 3 years with, I constantly do this in the classes and every week. So I do think it's important to do it in the online setting, especially when you have those, like even us, like we keep our cameras off for the meeting sometimes, mainly because we're multitasking and getting up and answering emails and all that stuff. So
I'm going to say in a recorded meeting that we never do that. That's just because we're afraid that we'll like get a weird look on our face, or, we wouldn't multitask during a meeting. 100% engagement.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like you got to understand the students too. And depending on their settings, like I would rather have a student maybe turn off their camera than show me their very dirty, messy dorm room, which has happened. But I think all of this is great, and we should be doing that, and we should be letting the students know what data is being tracked.
Now, I'm not going to shoot on us, but I did see Kim's hand. You inspired a thought. Go ahead, Kim. Remember to unmute yourself though, so we can hear your brilliance.
So I was thinking about the messy dorm room. But then, I mean, that's just like a whole nother conversation about privacy. And there's that whole there was a whole lawsuit about that, and, being able to see people's private space. So I think, I'm in a very messy space right now, to be honest with you. And, you could kind of see if you really wanted to look around and, where's Kim right now. But I think, having students know that there are ways to be on camera and not have your space invaded. That was just on the side.
No, it's a great point. And actually, it's not in this presentation, but I do put instructions in my team page on how to obscure your background so that they have, if they don't know how to do it, then I've offered some coaching in that way.
Yeah.
But if we're getting back to this idea of the transparency and showing that we care, if we put out there, and Rebecca, I think this is to your point, really, acknowledging that not everybody has had a great experience with their data being collected, but also being transparent that it's not like I am choosing to collect the data are collected, and I care about you and want you to know what data are collected, so you don't have this illusion of privacy that then the rug gets yanked out from underneath you when I mention that I was able to see these data. And so I think when we look at this, if we keep in our heart that we're doing this from a caring place and the helping space, then it reads differently than using the information as an I got you tool. And so I think some of this is really the conversations we have about this. And so we're going to be going into that soon. So I'm going to share my screen again. And so here we are back with Nell Noddings. We love Nell. And so if we're using this information for good instead of evil, right? We want to use the information from insights in Teams or the reports features in Blackboard that really can help you learn not only how your class materials are being used, but they can guide your decision-making as an educator. And so if I start at the top of this lovely graphic with this strange sort of lung-shaped images here, I can identify using these reports in the Insights feature, how and when students engage with the content, how they engage with their peers, and how they're performing on the assignments. I mean, most of that's from the gradebook features, but still, we also can track what time and how much time they're spending on different things with some wiggle room, right? We can't tell if they download something, how much time they spend with it then, but when they're in the actual space, we can see how much time they're spending in different areas. We then, as educators, can reflect on how the inputs we offer and the supports we offer, how those supports helping them succeed. We can also identify opportunities for growth and where we think assistance might be required. And so there's a big reflection element. This really models how we learn actually with this cycle. And so then we can sort of discuss our findings with students or our departments, and we can strengthen the relationships we have, set goals for ourselves, for our departments with students, self-review. Basically, the goal, we can use the information we have to not just internally grow, but also work as a collaborative team to grow. And then we can take action, developing interactions, providing feedback or ways to monitor our growth areas, modify our strategies, even when we're posting, sharing content, or sending announcements, can be guided by these bits of information. And we can identify other supports we might need. And so, you know, I mentioned that we might want to be transparent about what we're doing, but also, you know, in a webinar, sometimes you don't get a lot of how to do it. You get a lot of sort of what to do and why to do it. And so really, I wanted to embrace the how in our conversation. And so one way to acknowledge that bigger picture about data and privacy is to have those conversations explicitly. But sometimes it's a little challenging to hook into how am I going to do this, particularly if it's the first time you're starting this conversation. It could feel weird or uncomfortable. And so here we have a space where we can grow and learn from each other. And so there's lots of ways to sort of lean into this conversation. I dropped in the chat a link to an idea boards. If you have an inspiring idea, you can go ahead and click on that link anytime. I won't judge you if you're multitasking during the webinar, but you can click and then there's a little plus mark in the idea boards, and then you'll get the ability to open up a sticky note and throw your conversation starter idea in there. We're going to come back to this in the closure, but I just wanted to let you know that it was available whenever you have inspiration, and that this idea board is going to exist after the webinar. And so if you have an idea, maybe you're in the middle of enjoying dinner and then all of a sudden this great idea pops into your head, you can ignore all the people around you, your loved ones, and go ahead, hop on the idea boards and share the idea. Everybody will be able to see this. But does anybody have an idea that they wanted to share before we get into the nuts and bolts of how to access insights and use the reports in Blackboard? Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Q. I'm so excited to see this idea board. So what pops up is I was teaching an assessment class in counseling and school psychology department last night, and teaching statistics, really students are hesitate to ask questions even during the in-person class. So I'm thinking, even in the in-person class, we can still incorporate this online teaching tool so students can feel more comfortable to just type in, and it's confidential. We don't see who type in what idea, right? And we can show it on the classroom. I think that will be a wonderful tool that I can use.
Yeah, idea boards is great. And what's nice is it can be persistent. So if you have a different board for each class, you can use it for that. Having taught that class in the past, a million years ago, if I look at my watch, that's a challenging class to teach. You have a very diverse group, if I recall.
That's right. And may I ask, so we just open this link and anyone can access anytime? Okay, wonderful.
You can also set it up, I believe, that you can monitor what's being posted. So if you have someone who was about to make a bad choice, you can control that a little, I believe. But there's a lot of other options. Idea boards is just a low-hanging fruit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any ideas on how to lean into? Yes, absolutely. Padlet is a great one for that as well. Thanks, Rebecca. Other ideas for how we might sort of get those conversations started? I definitely do it in with my norm setting. When we talk about our class being a Vegas space, what happens here stays here. And then we talk about in the schools where most of them work, there's no real expectation of privacy on their computers. And that's sometimes surprising to them. And that if they're using their school's internet and the school's device, that there's no privacy. And then we talk about sort of what data are tracked on their computers there, but also in our learning management systems, what data are available to others. And so that's how I lean into it. But I have a more homogeneous group of students because most of my students are educators. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So I think privacy issues are in the news often enough these days that would be a good lead in. Just pick the latest privacy scandal. So like if I was doing something today, I might bring in the fact that apparently Twitter has fired all of their content moderation and privacy people. And so who knows what's going on that site and what's being tracked. And oh, by the way, did you know that Blackboard also tracks you too?
Yeah, that's a great way in. Any other ideas now? It's going to be up there, so you don't feel pressure. So hearing none, I'm going to hop into some of the logistics. So how do we do some of these things? And so in Teams, you can look to see what's going on in two different ways that I've found. There may be more. There's a personal app, which is an overview of all their active classes available from Teams that's in the app bar with the ability to drill down to specific class data. But I actually really like the Insight tab. And so that's what I've illustrated here on the slide, is that when I go into Teams, if I go into a team and you've got the picture of our Ed Leadership Department team, if I click on the plus, I can then search for insights. If in your first view of the different apps, you don't see it, you just click on that more apps and start typing, and then it pops up and it's a cute little purpley blue sort of periwinkle little eye light bulb, and then you can install it. I have to say that it's great because you can directly access the content that's happening in public channels. If you have private channels, it isn't going to pull that information. And so you would want to get those data in a different way. But Insight surveils the activity data from all the channels, and you can add it to any public channel, and it pulls the activity from everyone in the class in the team who is not a team owner. So if you're co-teaching something and you have another faculty member who's in the class but is not listed as an owner, it also pulls their data. So you might want to, if you're co-teaching or working with a colleague in a class, you might want them to be also listed as an owner so that it isn't pulling their data. And so what this looks like, if I oops, there we go. If I open up Insights, I open the tab, it's going to show me sort of what's going on in the class. And I can just go ahead and click on the button that says Get Insights for my class. And it allows me to sort of get lots and lots of persnickety detail within the class. It can get me this quick overview. That's the large image you see here. But it also gives me very specific information. And so you can see this picture here. It says all my students were active in July. This is clearly a summer class because I don't have any illusions of grandeur that all my students in the fall are actually engaging in content still in July and June. But if I look at this, it shows my students were active in July, all my students were active in June, and it gave me a little mention that so-and-so, I've whited out their name, often works late at night. And so I know that if I'm sending something really early in the morning, that person might not look at it until much later. So I wouldn't have that expectation that they're going to give me a very quick response. And so if I click within that and look at the digital activity, and so now this is a different class. And this class was a spring class for 684, which is a graduate class. It is learning theory into practice, and I protected their names. But you can see that it shows me when my students were actively using our course content. And so when I look, I see a pattern where right around March, the activity seems to thin a bit. Right? You see it's very active in January and February, and then I see a lot more white space in March and April, and then it picks up again in late April. And then I was surprised. I'm like, what is that? Way over on the right where I pointed that little arrow. Turns out that way after the class was over, one of my students at 10 at night opened up the PowerPoint presentation that we had used. And so go ahead, Kim, you had a question? Just remember, you're unmuted. Sorry, you're muted.
I just had a comment, but just finish up on your slide first.
I'm finished enough. Go ahead.
So I'm excited about this.
It's awesome.
Well, if I could just kind of tell you why. So we have an RN to BSN program. And for those of who you don't know, those are registered nurses that have an associate degree or diploma, and they're coming back to us for their baccalaureate degree, which they all need at some point. And it's a very tough population because many of the students have just finished their associate degree program. They're your non-traditional student, right? Like they're not your freshman coming in kind of thing. You're a non-traditional college student. They're working. Most of them are in a new job as a registered nurse. They have families. They have, everything, right? So the whole work-life balance thing. And what we find is that they come in and they're like very enthusiastic and they want to take 4 classes or whatever. And that they somehow can't they can't get the work done. And I think, when you have conversations with them, or they're struggling, it's kind of like, well, so anyway, so basically what I'm saying is I think this is going to be a great tool for my colleagues and I, because we can look at this on a regular basis and we can go in and we could, reach out to those students to say like, okay, what is going on? I think the other thing is in terms of posting information. So even if you're using it in an online course, for example, and you want to look at you've assigned a reading or something like that, and you want to see, I think this is a way to do it. And I think this looks better than what you get in Blackboard.
Well, I'm not going to throw shade at Blackboard because we're going to go into that soon, but I will say this is super intuitive And then
Yeah.
when you see something, you just click on it and it tells you what it was you're looking at,
Yeah.
which
So-
I like. But
Yeah, so I
so
think
the
it's gonna be
high
good.
level view can change what I'm doing as an educator. When I see that there's sort of a drop off in engagement, I need to look at what it is I'm doing and what I'm assigning, because maybe there's a lot going on outside of class, right?
Mhm.
Maybe the reading has picked up right at that week or those weeks. And so there's more out of the learning management system reading that they're doing. But also, that time of year, you're getting right into the state testing. I also have non-traditional students who are educators, and they have a lot of stuff going on in that time of year.
Mhm.
And so maybe I need to adjust my activities. And I don't mean to Disneyfy them, no offense to Walt Disney,
Mhm.
but I can do things that make sure that my content is even more engaging. It just means I need to step up my end if I want to drive greater engagement in those weeks that I've identified are troublesome. And maybe the content is engaging just in a different way. It's not on the learning management system. And so I'm not judging, I'm using the information available to sort of evaluate what's going on. So this is one source of information that I then marry with other sources to make good andragogical pedagogical decisions. Other thoughts on the teams before we slide into Blackboard? Go ahead, Bob. Just remember to unmute so we can hear you. And then Melanie, I saw you unmute, so you'll be next.
Basically, you have to create the team, right, in Teams.
Yes.
So you have to get the students enrolled in.
Yes, but it doesn't take much time at all.
Right, no, I understand the process. But so like in Blackboard, at the end of the semester, it goes away.
Only if you let it go away. You can adjust.
Well, you can extend it, right? You can extend it, right? But so with Teams, it doesn't, that doesn't occur. So if you
Oh,
have
no,
an
it expires, but again, you can renew it.
yeah, but that's like a year, right?
Yeah, but I want my students to have access to my course content for the whole time they're at Southern. So I
Okay.
keep clicking renew group.
Oh, okay, all right, that's great, excellent, wonderful. So thank you.
Oh, no problem. Was that the question?
Well, you know, my teaching experiences have been at Sacred University, and I never did any online teaching. And a lot of these things that seem to occur with online teaching doesn't occur when you're with them every day. You know, and they come into your office and you're constantly walking through the halls, they ask you questions. I mean, you know, it's a really, I mean, I'm amazed at the faculty and their ability to teach online. I think it's terrific.
Oh, thanks, Bob. And you're no small part of that. You make people feel welcome when they're learning the technologies at Southern. So thanks for all you do with that.
Thank you.
Mel?
Yeah, no, I thank you so much for sharing this. Because I didn't know that app existed, and I use Teams, even though I teach in person. I have a Teams for every single one of my classes because that is how I disseminate all of my information. And that's where I teach graphic design, for those of you that don't know me. That's where students submit their work too. So
Wow.
there's no more, let's collect USB drives, give me all this equipment. No, put your assignments on Teams, and then I can just download a folder with everyone's projects with all of the stages. So given the fact that I use Teams so heavily in my classes, I'm shocked that I didn't know that I could use the Insight app to get all of this information. And I also never really consider, I'm the one that, I leave my Teams open for maybe like a month after the class ends, and then I download all the data for myself, but I delete it for the students. I never really consider maybe leaving it open. I want to say that my students are proactive enough to download all the extra and supplemental materials that I give them during the semester. But, maybe they don't, and maybe it'll be good for them to have access to that throughout the entire Southern career.
And you have options within Teams, right? If you put it in that class materials folder, it's read only as opposed to putting it in other folders. So you can decide, you know what, I want them to have access to that, but actually I'm going to hide these other things. Maybe you don't want them to have access to everybody else's work or to other things. And so you can actually curate what it is you want available.
So I can hide folders too.
I believe so.
Okay, because I put everything in the class materials and they can download it. So
they
it's
can
not just-
download it, but
yeah.
they can't delete it. Like if you put it in a regular folder, I've
Exactly,
had.
yeah. So they can't delete any of the stuff that's in there.
Right.
The stuff that they do put in, then it's in folders that are accessible to everyone, and they can delete or add and all that stuff. And I just expect them to be respectful to others and not delete other students' work.
That's probably what you have in your norms for your group.
I do. So that would be considered a norm.
Yes, that they can add things, but they don't delete things. And if they're going to edit things, they only edit their own. That's part of your norms for your group. You probably have norms, you just don't have them explicitly posted.
And I just don't realize that okay.
Yeah, you have norms. It's how we agree to exist together in our classroom family. Kim flashed a hand, but Q has hers still up. So we're going to Q first.
I have a question about the Blackboard share. How do we keep it for years? Because earlier in the year, one of my colleagues, very generous, would like to share her course share with me, but that course was not taught for more than 4 years. And so it's completely disappeared. So I want to ask, how do we prevent that? And is there a way that we can keep those old course share?
There definitely is. And I'm about to show you a screen share where I can point out where that lives in Blackboard. It's a little beyond the scope of what we're doing, but it's certainly a useful tool. So I will point that out when we go into the next thing. Kim, was that an errant flash? All right, so then let me share my screen so I can show Q where that lives. And so bye-bye, Teams. All right, Blackboard. Hello, Blackboard. When we're in Blackboard, I have a picture of the course management panel here, the tool panel. And I believe, and Bo, feel free to correct me if I have this wrong. Whoops. Don't click your magic mouse when you're not expecting to. If you go into, I believe it's the customization, and you can set your time for the course to end. And I have to say that I remember being asked not to set the dates as continuous, but to actually choose an end date. So I think my courses for this semester in Blackboard they'll expire in 2032, because if the students haven't graduated in 10 years, that's really another issue that we have to address. So I generally set it for 2030 something, and that way I know that course is going to persist in Blackboard. So I think that answered the question. Q, if you can't find it, let me know afterwards, and I'd be happy to go through it with you. I'm sure that there are others here who would also do that. So when we're talking about Blackboard Learn 9, and we want these reports, we actually can get to it in the evaluation tab. If you go in the evaluation tab, if you don't see all these 3 little things underneath, make sure that that little arrow, that little caret is pointed down to expand the menu. And then we're going to go into the course reports or the retention center. I have to say, I don't use the retention center very much, but I can show it to you now. It basically gives you an overview of which students might be in danger. It lets you highlight some high-level data. You can star students to watch them more closely. What I like about the course reports feature is that it shows you more nuanced data. You can get all the very persnickety data for an individual student or for a whole class. And there are a lot of different course reports. And I've been using the course reports for over 10 years. And I still sometimes choose the wrong one when I'm looking for something. But there really isn't any harm in that, except I lose a minute or two. Big hairy deal, right? So when I go into the course reports, I do have a favorite. Well, I have a couple favorites. My first favorite is the course activity overview. My second is the overall summary of user activity. And then the most drilled down is that student overview for a single course. And so these three reports are my go-to reports for different reasons. And so the first, the course activity overview, lets me see sort of that big picture, that high level of what's happening when. So I click the down arrow right next to the report, and then I patiently wait for the option page to pop up. Depending on whether I'm on campus or home, this takes a different amount of time. And so I take a deep breath. The pop-up opens. I'm careful not to click it multiple times because that just gums up the works. And so then once I have the option page pop up, I choose my dates and then I hit submit. And again, I am patient because sometimes it takes a little bit long for it to run. And I'll show you what it looks like on the next slide, but it's a PDF report that shows you sort of what's the most popular day of the week and how long people spend in the class environment. The overall summary of user activity lets me pick one or more students and a date range and see what it is they're doing within the course during that time. It's super specific and it lists every activity by every day. It's good for seeing if my announcements are having a desired effect, right? The announcements I send through Blackboard, are they driving students where I want them to drive or go? Where I want students to go within the site? Like, am I getting the result I hope I'm getting? And then that last one, the student overview, tells you what and when a student access content. It really helps target a discussion with a specific student when you might have a concern. And so this is where it's really important to make sure that you have this ethic of care, that you're really caring about your student as opposed to gotcha. Because that student overview for a single course can be used in a negative way. You just want to sort of protect your relationship by using it in a positive way, because if we want our students to learn, we need to keep those relationships in a positive thing. So there's that. Let me show you what some of these look like. So here's that sample course activity overview. This was for a class that was on Tuesday nights. You can see that students were engaging on Tuesday nights and they were doing a lot of work on the weekends. And I highlight this because that's not true of every class. And so each of my classes might have different patterns, and then I adjust what I'm doing to them. It's not the other way around, which seems almost counterintuitive, right? I'm the teacher. Okay, some of them are teachers too. But because I am really focused on their learning versus what's convenient for me, I bend to what they are doing. And so I can see what their behaviors are and adjust my work so that I know that if I send an announcement on a Tuesday night after class, people probably aren't going to see that until the weekend. If I send an announcement on Tuesday morning, most of my students are going to see that before class or during class if they're opening it up once we get there. So I can choose how I'm going to engage with my class based on the information that I see here. Now, a different class. Here's a Wednesday night class. This is the overall summary of user activity. If I look at this image that has the table and the bar graph. Actually, several of them do. So it's the one on the right, left, the one that says access by day of the week. This class, you can see that there are 0 hits on Saturday and Sunday. This might be the same class, but it's a different group of people. It's the same course, but it's not the same people. So this is a 2022 class. The one before was a 2019 class. And so you can see that for this group of people, they are doing their work on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So if I want them to see something, I really want it available, or I want to drive something on either Monday night or Tuesday morning. That gets me a great likelihood that they are going to see it before class on Wednesday. I also know something about their habits. They're doing the readings for my class on either the day before or the day of class. So if I'm expecting them to have done lots of reflecting on these readings, I know I'm wasting my breath, right? They're sort of just in time doing the work. Now that's great, they're doing the work, but I also need to know that if I'm going to ask them to reflect on something, I might need to provide a little more wait time. Let's see. So now one more before we go back to just looking at each other's beautiful faces. Here's my student overview. I have one student here. This is an unfortunate situation because I have moved over to Teams pretty much primarily. So there's not a whole lot for students to do on Blackboard, but I did find something to show you. And so this is one student there for this class. There really was only one thing for them to do, which was take the practice exercise for the CAT exam. They did this. They did one version of it 8 times. They did one version of it 2 times. They looked at the test booklet that had the content for our course bolded. Notice it looks like they spent no time doing that. They probably just downloaded it. And then the same thing for the traditional textbook, test booklet. And then the same thing for the PD to fix. So when you see something that's very short, the odds are they just went in there to download or get access to something else. So let me stop sharing. Share my screen. And basically, thank you again for even coming today, right? The Office of Online Learning offers so many resources, but we have to reach out and grab them for ourselves. And so I went ahead and put the QR code here because if someone is viewing the recording of this, they might not have access to the chat materials. And so you also can just point your phone right at the QR code on the screen, and it will open up the idea boards. And I'm going to share the slides. Actually, I might have already sent them to Bo, but everybody can have access to the slides so that you don't have to remember exactly, wait, what report was that? How did I get there? How do I add the insight tabs to my team? But I want you to have the ability to access this whenever you want. I also set up the idea boards with a tiny URL. If you don't want to use your camera or your tablet from your phone, you can just go to the tiny URL, engage Big Brother, and you get a link back to the idea boards. Kim, go ahead.
Jess, how was it transitioning from Blackboard to Teams in terms of like sort of this, students, right? Students are students are used to, certain ways. I know, I don't know if this happens at our school, but I know, some places there's a, this is how your Blackboard has to be set up, kind of that, I guess the universal design kind of concept, which, but which is good, right? I think. it's kind of-
Universal design for learning is important.
Yes, yes. But I wonder how like students responded to this transition, and if you have any data or just anecdotal.
I have anecdotal data.
Yeah.
This is a lot more similar to Google. And a lot of my students are educators and they use the Google Suite. And so
Yeah.
while they would still prefer me to go that way, which I won't do,
Right.
I'll play by the rules, but they do like the ability to collaborate. It at first was an issue with Teams that it was a little bit more of a bandwidth hog. It's gotten better. It also didn't have as graceful meeting capabilities as Zoom,
Mhm.
but my students like Teams, the meetings in Teams better than they do in the Collaborate Ultra. I would say it's a style preference. And I have some students who would honestly prefer me to use Blackboard and some who prefer me to use Teams. And so in the spirit of meeting my students' needs and practicing as a yoga master, I actually build my classes in both. And so students can access all the materials in Blackboard, but Blackboard is mostly like a filing cabinet now for me and a
Uh-huh.
grade book. Teams is where the meaningful interactions happen. I would say at this point, there's maybe 3 or 4 announcements that go out through Blackboard during a semester for me, but Teams might be once or twice a week.
Okay.
So I am Teams. And once my students know how to use Teams, they like it. But there's a lot of hand-holding
Mhm.
in the first semester. They're using Teams. And before the semester even starts, I offer an optional session where they can come and just get comfortable with Teams. Anyone who shows up to the optional session before the semester starts, they share their screen, they practice that, they mute, they unmute, they throw up a little reaction. They use the chat to throw in like a goofy GIF, like just the warm, fuzzy community things
Yeah.
that help them get comfortable. And some of those don't really happen in Blackboard. And so we use Teams because it can be a little goofy.
And then I had another question. So I'm actually thinking about piloting this, trying this in the spring. I have a graduate course that's probably has 6 students in it. It's a special project course. So I'm thinking about trying it in that. When I think it was Melanie was saying about sort of pulling the papers, down like their work in the course. So I'm just curious about that. So like when I do a lot of my feedback to students just directly in Blackboard.
Yes.
Rather than downloading. And then because when you download, you get but you don't just get a Word document or a PDF, you get some other kind of documents. Bo, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so students will especially have this problem if a student is using a Mac and they use Pages or something and they upload it and then you can't open it. You'll run into the same issue whether you're using Teams or you're using Blackboard or that kind of stuff. The experience is very similar.
Okay.
And I think just and Melanie, who used Teams, will tell you that the 2 platforms are fairly similar in a lot of ways. The biggest difference is the communication piece that Teams offers, right? So it straddles that line between the synchronous and asynchronous communication, which you can't really do. You can't do Blackboard, right? So that then you end up using Zoom or whatever other platform to run your synchronous communication. But you also have that more informal chat in Teams that you don't have in and anything else.
Yeah, and I think moving, my thought is that I do my class meetings in Teams anyway. So it might be nice to kind of to try everything. So so this has been really helpful, and I'm excited to try it in the spring with that group to see how it works.
And the Office of Online Learning did great trainings, and I'm sure some of them are recorded, and they may also still do some of them. But I mean, I learned Teams, sort of that just-in-time training,
Mhm.
and they were super helpful in getting me up and running. So I went from being super scared / frustrated / angry to feeling pretty confident and able to coach my students to get them past that place where it was like the heightened emotion, right? Their amygdala, they had flipped their lid,
Yeah.
and I had to close it down to get their, the frontal cortex involved so they could do the reasoning and good thinking, right? They did a great job getting me to that place so I could get my students to that place.
Yeah, we have a great Office of Online Learning.
We do. We really
Thanks
do.
thanks to COVID.
Well, they were great people before and helpful
They
before.
were,
Yeah.
but they're better now. Yes.
Melanie, you've been very patient.
No, I wanted to say that so I didn't do a course or looked up help. I just kind of like just threw myself in it. The transition is very easy. You can pick it up quick. Teams is just very user friendly. And I love having everything in one place, right? So it's one place for the class meetings, it's one place for the documentation, it's one place for them to submit their information. And they don't have to go, okay, we're gonna look this up on Blackboard, but we're gonna use Zoom for online meetings. And then we're gonna use another app for this. So I really like the whole sync of everything being in one place. And students, I don't know that there's an easy transition for students because we don't all use the same platform. So your students may still have another professor that will prefer Blackboard and use Blackboard, and they just have to adjust to both. What I do on my very first day is just going over the syllabus, going over semester expectations, and going over Teams. So I asked who is not familiar with Teams, who has never used Teams. And then I just do a quick tutorial on how the class is set up, how it's going to look, where they look at the materials. I try to have all of my information, all of my main general information already posted, and all of the folders where they're going to submit assignments for the semester, they're already going to be in there by the first week of class. The only thing that I do not share with them is the project guidelines. And that's because, with creative projects, I don't want them to start working on project number 4 when they should be working on project number 1. But that way they see everything, they practice it. And then I just try to pay a little bit more close attention to the ones that I know are completely brand new to Teams, and randomly ask them questions in the next couple of weeks. Like, did you find this information? Or notice if they're asking me a question, I just reply, so you haven't looked at Teams. So did you remember what we talked about? Do you remember how to access this information? And at least in my area, as they come up, because I teach sophomore, juniors, and seniors, as they take classes with me, then they already know how to use Teams, and I don't have to constantly explain it. But I always, I may have a senior that transfer and it's coming into one of those 300 level classes, 400 level class, and has never used Teams. So I think the transition is super easy. It's great that we have the Office of Distance Learning to guide us and all of that. Like, I know now that I'm going to be teaching a full online asynchronous class, I'm definitely going to be tapping into those resources. Just make sure that everything goes smooth for all students. But yeah, I think it also something that Jess said, it's the closest thing to Google that students have that they use in other institutions. And at the K-12 level too, they use Google. I was actually surprised that we use Microsoft when I came on board.
Security.
Yeah.
Thanks
Um,
for that, Melanie. That's helpful.
I also just wanted to add the channels. When you're setting it up, if you have small groups and you want them to be able to work on something as a small group, and maybe they're going to be presenting it to their colleagues, setting up private channels in Teams allows them to have that private space to work. You can always still see it as the instructor, but their colleagues can't. So they can still have surprises. And that way they don't have to share their cell phone numbers or meet up someplace. You've created that private room, that space for them to do that work. And if you are looking to do that, you can still let them know that you can see in their space. And this goes back to that transparency. You wouldn't want them to think that their space was totally private, but then you could see what their chat was within that space or what their file was or see their meetings. And so they have the ability to record their meetings within those private channels, but still, I think that's important to just wherever you can be open and show them and model that transparency so that when they are working with other people in other classes or when they're in their careers, they can, tap back into that and like, well, when I was in class with Q, she was really good about setting norms. When I'm running this meeting at work, I want to set norms. Or, Melanie was really good about making sure I had the resources I need. And so I could go to them anytime. When I'm working with people, I want to make sure they have the materials. I don't want to control the information. There's power in sharing and caring about the group so that I am open and letting everybody see the information. I'm not trying to hold it and just dole it out so I can manage people. Does that make sense? And so that sort of leans into what we were doing here when it comes to sharing what information is available. I've actually in the past, in that warm-up session where it's totally optional, I've shown them the reports, like what data are collected and how I use that. Like I've shown them the two different classes, the class that didn't use it on the weekends and the class that did use it on the weekends. And so they know that I have the ability to see when it is they're using the environment, but I'm not using it as a gotcha. I'm using it to schedule when I'm going to contact them, that I'm respecting their weekends. If they're not working on the weekends, I am not sending them an email on the weekend. And that's just a helpful way of doing that. So I just want to lift up that Rebecca mentioned in the chat that social option to set something up in non-class stuff. Some people have called it a parking lot or like a coffee room or just the water cooler where they can just put social things that aren't class related, but you can still see them so they can't do naughty things. What were you, Rebecca, you wanted to add to that? Please do.
No, I was just gonna say the water cooler was a common term for it. Yeah, and this was actually something, I got my education master's in an online program, and this was something that they did every single semester. We had a cohort system, and it was everything from, does anybody have a recommendation for, I'm going to be in, Phoenix this weekend. Does anybody have a recommendation for a good restaurant? So what are people reading? Got the weekend off. I want to read something that isn't class related. So it kind of helps with the social coherence of the class, and especially if you have a cohort system.
And Melanie, if you're teaching asynchronously, having a dedicated space for non-academic things, or even a dedicated space for examples people are offering. So maybe in the asynchronous space, someone really likes to be a resource. They can share their inspirational ideas in that space, sort of like making it in-class sort of Pinterest spot.
Yeah, no, I really love that. Right now, I just use my general like channel, and we post design events
Mhm.
and Zoom meetings that I think is relevant to all the students, and the students can also share events that they hear about that I'm not aware. But I have not done that, and I just love that idea, Rebecca. I am going to do that from now on because we have done it in the past. I'm very open, and sometimes I've had classrooms, not this semester in particular, but I had one where everyone was a pet lover. And we all talked about our dogs and showed pictures of our dogs. And one of my students was big on TikTok with videos of her dog. So that will always allow for just like some relaxing moments inside of the classroom and not taking things too serious. So I'm gonna start doing that right now, right away this weekend. I'm gonna create some folders and all classes.
And
Yeah.
in Teams, you can do it in the channel. And I do just want to acknowledge when you're setting up your norms, when you have synchronous meetings, be clear about whether guest supervisors in the form of little people are welcome. Guest supervisors in the form of fur babies, right? I mean, I've had classes where almost every person on the screen had some sort of furry guest supervisor. And so it just seemed like there'd be like a tail going across the screen. Almost every 10 minutes, there'd be a different tail just sort of wagging across the screen, or sometimes you'd see something get knocked over because there were students who were worried about making sure their pets were locked out of the room, and just making sure that in our norms, you know what, it's okay if your kids are going to go to bed, that they come give you a hug good night. Like that's totally okay. And just that explicit, like how we're treating each other as a classroom family, having that in the norms. But Kim, you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
I actually had a question. So one of the things that I do in all my courses is to prevent getting emails about when a student has a question about something, I will do like a, I forget what I call it, muddy points discussion in Blackboard. But I forget to check it. So so what I'm thinking, is there a way to, Teams is always like open, right? And so I'm wondering if anybody kind of does anything like that. And if you get like a real time, like, you know, Johnny just posted a question. If I get a real time notification, I could answer it right away versus, oh my gosh, I have, because my courses are asynchronous for the most part. So then I have to remember to go in and check. And to be honest with you, I need to be better at that.
So I teach my students how to tag me using the
Okay.
@ symbol. And that way I get an alert on my watch, on my phone, on my computer.
Okay.
Oh, is that what you were going to say?
I was just gonna go back to Blackboard for a second and
Yep.
say that, Kim, you can actually subscribe to a discussion board in Blackboard, and that will
Okay.
send you notifications whenever someone's posting something.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
And so I put the idea boards link back in the chat. It has more than just those conversation starter section. It also has a section for you to provide me feedback, right? As educators, we need that feedback to grow and improve. And so I would be grateful if you would take a moment or two and throw a sticky note wherever you'd like on that idea boards. There are no parameters, although I think we'd want to keep it from being profane. But I would love some feedback on this session. And I want to again thank the Office of Online Learning for the whole series. And leave it up to you guys if you have any closing thoughts or questions.
So I just want to thank you, Jess, for a wonderful and engaging presentation and a wonderful and engaging conversation between everybody who was here. And we'll have a continuation of the series in the spring as well. So I encourage you guys to attend as many as you can, because to me, this is how we all learn, right? Having these conversations and listening to each other, and not just having one voice out there that tells us everything, right? So I'm so grateful to Jess and everybody else who presented during this series.
Bo, this is on the side, nothing related to this. Is this yours?